Today, we're looking at a very real problem for a PC gamer. They spent thousands of dollars for this epic gaming rig, and their living room, well, it's stuck with consoles. And they'd have to spend thousands of other dollars for a PC for the living room. And at that point, it almost seems more worth it to just play a console. Enter Valve's solution, and we end up with the most underrated Valve product that they have ever created. Today, we're talking about the Steam Link and how to make one in 2019. In 2015, Valve released the Steam Link. 2015 was an interesting time because Valve was actually mounting an offensive against Windows. You see, Microsoft had just launched their store and their unified platform that only works with their store. Now, some developers took to Twitter, but Valve issued a very real threat. They created their very own Linux-based operating system that still kind of sees support today. In fact, actually, I want to explore gaming on Linux entirely because of Valve's support and how most games can now run on it. But going back to 2015, that really wasn't as big of a deal. It looked like Valve was fighting an uphill battle. But this was enough to have Windows, Microsoft back off a little bit. And when they did, Valve released the Steam Link, effectively killing their own operating system and the Steam machines that were accompanying it. Now, the Steam machines were created by multiple companies, all of which were not Valve. But they did release the Steam Link, and honestly, it is still the best piece of hardware to play your PC games on the TV. Now, this device, though, was ill-fated. Unfortunately, the Steam Link didn't do very well. Part of that was Valve didn't really make Ethernet mandatory, and in-home streaming really requires a solid Ethernet connection. To the point that the Steam Link will work over Wi-Fi, but there will be quite a delay. But over Ethernet, especially over a gigabit LAN port, you're really not gonna see that much delay. We actually tested it, and it's within a perceptible millisecond. So realistically, the same time it takes your monitor to display, you could be streaming it and displaying it on another display. Now, of course, you have to add in that one's latency, but I digress. So essentially, this thing was actually kind of awesome. In fact, it had a function on it that even if you weren't hardlined all throughout your house, you could hardline the Steam Link to your computer directly, and it would work that way. That actually was an impressive and sort of weird feature of the device. The device also had 3 USB ports, which meant it was capable of having a keyboard, mouse, and controller plugged in at all times. And there was its own controller, which I do have. That's a little, let's just say it's a little unorthodox. But that's a topic for another day. Unfortunately, as awesome as this device is, it was discontinued in 2018. Now, you can still find them. They are not too hard to find on eBay, and I believe the Amazon listing still occasionally gets stuff in under the used category. And realistically, I've had mine for all 5 years, almost 5 years, and it hasn't had a problem. And I just updated the firmware today. And it still just works. It's actually a very useful piece of technology. So then, why am I making this video? Well, since the Steam Link was discontinued, I actually thought about just throwing out this video after re-exploring how awesome it was, until I found out that there were a couple of different ways that we could actually make a Steam Link. Valve didn't kill it, they just discontinued the manufacturing of their hardware. The software exists, and it exists on multiple platforms. It exists on Android and Pi, Raspberry and OS, which is interesting. So we decided to test both options. To start, we did a baseline test with the actual Steam Link, and this is as good as it gets. The connection was stable, the operating system worked flawlessly, and honestly, this is the expectation for in-home streaming. I was able to play a game that required precision platforming, like Shantae Half Genie Hero. You're going to see that game 3 other times, as this is our test game. It's very input heavy and not really that hard to play. After that, we went to the phone. Now, recently we did a video about using a phone as a game console, and we used the Steam Link app. From there, it was as simple as plugging in our appropriate dongles and connecting it to the TV. And from here, well, things didn't go well. There were micro stutters and a resolution issue where if the game was running at a higher resolution than the screen, then it would flicker, crop down, and then pop back up. And even in one case, we ended up with a resolution that none of the screens supported. It was a very, very weird time using the smartphone. That being said, I would have liked to test a full USB-C dock. You see, a USB-C dock with Ethernet and video out might actually yield better results, as there's a possibility that the phone will work over Ethernet, and I haven't really tested that yet. Then finally, the real solution was a Raspberry Pi. Now this was a bit of a problem to get going. So first off, if you've never used a Raspberry Pi, it is a small Linux chip. I actually have 2 of them. One of these is GamerGuts' old Pi 3, and this one is a Pi 2, I think. Yeah. Man, these chips. So this one will not work, but this one will. And getting it set up was not the most difficult thing once you followed the instructions on the website on how to format the SD card properly and then put the OS on there. It wasn't that bad. There were actually only 2 command lines that needed to be run, and then finding the Steam Link app was a bit of a chore. But after all of that, failure struck, and it struck entirely because of me. I use gigabit Ethernet throughout this entire apartment, and because of that, I actually have to use a couple of different LAN splitters. They're all throughout, and the main reason that they exist is because I need more than 4 ports, and we have a couple of different areas that we need to break out at. So because of that, I hooked everything up to this setup behind me, which is connected to the breakout box over there. And because of that, I had so much latency. There's footage of it. It is really bad. And after I decided to test to see if it was my fault, by plugging it in to the Ethernet cable across the room, which is actually directly connected to the router, I realized that I was being very, very silly. The purpose of a gigabit LAN switch is to switch traffic and send it to the router. And because I was trying to saturate a gigabit on 2 lines at the exact same time, it was cutting my bandwidth in half, which is exactly why I was getting such delays. Once we got it started on the TV proper though, it was pretty awesome. It was great for a little while, but the Pi started to overheat. Now, the Pi throttles. It throttles really hard when it gets warm, And it became noticeable over time that there was more and more delay being added up, to the point that I can't really call this a perfect solution yet, but we can make it perfect. So all we need to do is get a proper cooling solution on this chip, probably a proper case around it, and yeah, that would be it. Honestly, we could probably get one of those really small Knoxville fans, slap that bad boy right on there, and this thing would be awesome. So all in all, how is it? So in conclusion though, is this a real solution? Is using a Steam Link the best way to play games in your living room connected to the same Ethernet? Yes, actually. It's to the point that over my network, my very, very powerful network, it doesn't make much of a difference. When it's running at its full capacity, there are very few artifacts, and there's very little latency. And honestly, it just leads to an experience that's exactly the same, whether it's here or there. And I was surprised that things like my Razer's DPI switch worked on the Steam Link. If you can get a hold of a Steam Link proper, I would get a hold of one of those. But they will eventually run out. After that, I would set up an RPie with a cooling fan. If you can do that, you'll end up with a solution that not only works, but is a bit more customizable. Because you can put a RetroPie in place, or make it so that your SD cards are almost like a cartridge and you can just switch boots when you don't want to use the Steam Link. Essentially, we have a very useful piece of technology, but not a lot of people are using it. Either way, it's just some food for thought, I guess. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed watching me kind of dive back into the Steam Link, you can leave a like. I mean, I know not a lot of people are talking about this thing. It's really a weird situation because it works and it works well, but if you look at any tech YouTuber, they're not really going to talk about it. I don't know. I digress. Thank you guys again. Wolfie.